Good afternoon, everyone. The subcommittee will come to order. I want to thank you all for joining us here today to discuss the role of veterans' preference in the federal hiring process. Some form of veterans' preference has been a fixture in federal hiring since the Civil War, and while it's clear that the federal government does do a good job of hiring veterans, we need to look at ways to modernize current rules and regulations, increase enforcement, and change overall the bureaucratic attitudes about hiring veterans. In theory, veterans and disabled veterans should be eligible for the 10 or 15-point preference in the competitive or expected service, which should act as a tiebreaker. So that if you have two equally qualified candidates for one job and one of them is a veteran, then they should receive the position. In reality, veterans' preference is often thwarted by an overly complicated competitive or expected service system, as well as a feeling of unfairness from veterans' civilian counterparts who are also applying for jobs in the federal government. While what's more disappointing is that this committee hears complaints on both sides of the issue. It's not uncommon for VA hiring managers to complain that they always try to use a special hiring authority to hire a new employee because when they use the competitive hiring service, they get back a certification list from VA's HR that blocks qualified non-veteran candidates and only lists non-qualified veteran candidates. And I'm sure that this is an issue facing HR officials across the federal government. On the flip side, it's not uncommon for us to hear from veterans who were blocked by HR officials or managers for consideration because of their bias against veteran candidates. A recently uncovered court document highlighted this bias where a senior official at one VA hospital said that when hiring for positions at their hospital, they gave more credit to a candidate who was involved in community organizations like the Boy Scouts or something like that than those with veteran status. When asked if they always tried to hire veterans, the official was quoted as saying, "Not really, and thank God." Now, I believe personally that veterans are what they were in uniform, selfless and able to put the needs of others ahead of themselves. But that comment about "not really" and "thank God" is the type of institutional bias that has to be eliminated from the department and government-wide. I can only hope that this official's views represent the smallest minority of VA and government hiring managers, but I'm not sure. It's also concerning to me that while veterans make up approximately 33% of VA's workforce, a recent media report highlighted that only 13% of VA's senior managers are veterans. While I do understand that with education and experience comes opportunities for promotion, it's critical that VA and all government agencies find ways to improve veterans hiring for management positions as well. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about how to modernize veterans' preference rules and regulations and how federal government agencies like OPM and DOL are enforcing current laws. The committee will continue its work on hiring reforms at VA and the federal government, and I'm hopeful that a meaningful and frank conversation today will assist us in these efforts. I now yield to my colleague, Ranking Member Takano, for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to say what a pleasure it is to have Assistant Secretary Michaud back in the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Welcome back, sir. Veterans have devoted and highly informed ally at DOL Vets, and we're looking forward to working together with him on policies that will help veterans transition to civilian life and find meaningful jobs. Chairman Winstrup, I appreciate your decision to call this hearing. Even though veterans' preference policies fall under Title V and are not part of this committee's jurisdiction, there's no doubt that members of this subcommittee on both sides of the aisle want to learn how we can improve the process. Federal jobs allow veterans to continue the public service they began when they entered the military, and veterans' preference in the federal hiring process is an important aspect of how we as a nation reward those who chose to serve. These policies are meant to ensure that veterans seeking federal employment are not penalized for their time spent in military service, especially after being deployed overseas during wartime. Veterans' preference restores veterans to a favorable competitive position for government employment and acknowledges the larger obligation that we as a society owe to disabled veterans. Most importantly, veterans' preference hiring policies make good business sense, as we will hear from our witnesses today. Our nation invests significant resources into training and developing our service members, and federal agencies directly federal agencies directly benefit from this training when they hire veteran employees. Veterans are trained in a wide variety of valuable skills and experiences during their time in the military. To name just a few examples, the skills gained while leading others, making quick decisions, and developing strategy directly translate into management roles in the federal government. And experience in fields like IT and cybersecurity help advance the missions of our federal agencies by filling crucial skills gaps. While veterans' preference policies do not guarantee veterans a job, they provide useful tools in the application process for qualified candidates. I am pleased that we will be reviewing the program from the veterans' point of view, as opposed to reviewing it from a managerial perspective, as they do at the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. I appreciate all of the witnesses being here today and look forward to the opportunity to ask questions and have the benefit of your answers. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Takano. I now want to recognize our first panel of witnesses today. Our first panel, we have the Honorable Michael H. Michaud, Assistant Secretary of the Veterans Employment and Training Service at the U.S. Department of Labor. Ms. Karen M. Otero, the Associate Deputy Assistant Secretary for HR Policy and Planning for the Office of Human Resources and Administration at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And Mr. Mark D. Reinhold, the Associate Director for Employee Services for the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Assistant Secretary Michaud, it's a pleasure to have you back with us today in this hearing room, and I appreciate personally the outreach that you took upon yourself since accepting your position. It's appreciated very much. But let's begin with you, and you have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the department's performance with and responsibility to veterans' preference in federal government hiring. While the employment situations for veterans continue to improve, with veterans' unemployment being lower than non-veterans' unemployment, DOL will not rest as long as any veteran needs assistance finding meaningful civilian employment. The department is committed to following veterans' preference in our hiring. We have steadily increased the percentage of veterans in DOL workforce from 20.6% in fiscal year 2013 to 21.4% in fiscal year 2015. In fiscal year 2015, 1 in 3 new hires at DOL was a veteran, of which 37.5% of those veterans hired were veterans with a rated disability of at least 30%. DOL Veterans Employment Program Office provides leadership and direction for the department to ensure DOL attracts, hires, retains qualified veterans. In November of 2009, President Obama issued Executive Order 13518, which created the Veterans Employment Initiative to enhance recruitment of and promote employment opportunities for veterans within the executive branch. Executive Order 13518 also established the Council of Veterans Employment. The Council is still working to complete its fiscal year 2015 report, but has published data for fiscal year 2014 when 33.2% of the executive branch new hires were veterans, a 9.2% point increase over fiscal year 2009 baseline of 24%. Veterans currently represent 30.8% of the federal workforce as compared to 25.8% of fiscal year 2009. Under the Veterans Employment Opportunity Act of VEOA, vets' responsibility for investigating claims alleging a federal agency failure to apply veterans' preference in hiring or during a reduction in force. While vets has investigative responsibility, OPM is responsible for interpreting and administrating the statutes and regulations governed by veterans' preference in federal hiring and during a reduction in force. When a complaint is filed, Vets field staff investigate if rights have been violated by a federal agency during either a hiring process or a reduction in force. Upon reaching the determination, vets notifies the agency and advises on action to be taken to comply with the VOA. If the agency complies, the case is closed as either settled or granted based on agreement between the parties. The resolution depends on the violation that occurred and may include payments, back payments, or benefits. If the agency fails to comply, the claimant is notified of his or her rights to appeal the case to the United States Merit System Protection Board, or the MSPB. Finally, if the MSPB issues a decision adverse to the claimant may further appeal to the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. If vets determines that a VOA violation has taken place or there is evidence of a violation, a copy of the complete case file, including the complaint information and supporting documentation, is forwarded to the United States Office of Special Counsel. Of the 606 complaints received in fiscal year 2015 and the 34 cases that were carried over from fiscal year 2014, vets closed 590 cases. On average, the cases were resolved in 23 days. Of the 590 veterans preference cases closed in fiscal year 2015, 32, or 5.4%, were found to have merit in fiscal year 2015. Investigations were completed in the 491 of the 590 cases. The remaining 99 cases were closed administratively, withdrawn by the claimant, or the claimant elected to proceed to the MSPB before the investigation concluded within the time frame allowed by statute. The Department looks forward to working with the committee in this area. Veterans are some of our strongest and most capable employees in public workforce, and we are committed to making sure that they have a place at the Department of Labor in their preference rights. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and committee members, this concludes my opening statement. I look forward to the opportunity to working with you, and I welcome your questions. Thank you very much. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Good job, under the wire. Thank you, sir. Ms. Oteri, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wenstrup, Ranking Member Takano, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your invitation to appear before the subcommittee on Veterans Preference and the Department of Veterans Affairs' success in recruiting and hiring veterans. I would like to highlight the department's commitment to hiring veterans. We believe that affording qualified veterans a statutory preference in employment is not merely the obligation of a grateful nation, it is also good government and good business. It gives VA an advantage in recruiting and retaining employees from a pool of the nation's most highly motivated, disciplined, and experienced preference-eligible veterans. VA is adamant about and consistent in ensuring the application of the existing federal regulation, which requires the selection of all qualified preference-eligible veterans over other individuals when filling positions that are open to the general public. VA's internal hiring procedures are aligned with the merit system principles, of which the basis is to recruit qualified individuals from all segments of society and select in advance on merit after fair and open competition. In addition to our hiring policies and procedures that address veterans' preference, VA's Human Resources Oversight and Effectiveness Office evaluates compliance with veterans' preference laws, regulations, and policies, conducting on-site evaluations of human resources offices throughout VA. VA has focused on veterans hiring for many years. We track the employment of veterans by facility throughout VA. We have launched various programs and initiatives which have resulted in VA placing in the top tier of agencies employing veterans. As of February 29, 2016, more than 119,000, or just shy of 33%, of VA's 365,000 employees are veterans. More than 100,000 of the 33% are veterans preference eligibles, and 47,000, approximately 12%, are disabled veterans. VA proudly ranks first among non-defense agencies in hiring veterans. VA regularly uses veteran-specific special hiring authorities, such as the Veterans Employment Opportunities Act, the Veterans Recruitment Appointment, and 30% or more disabled veterans. We have also hired veterans using the Schedule A authority for people with disabilities. In the first 5 months of fiscal year 2016, VA hired 8,705 veterans using a mixture of all of the above-mentioned authorities. The department has established a strategic target of 35% veterans for its employee population. One of the challenges that we face is the rate at which veterans are leaving the department. While recognized early on by the Office of Personnel Management as having one of the better retention rates in government, the cohort of veterans who joined the Department of Veterans Affairs after the Vietnam War is now eligible for retirement. In contrast, younger veterans, similar to other U.S. workers their age, are frequently more mobile, changing jobs and employers more often than many older employees. On average, VA has lost about 1,300 veteran employees per month during this fiscal year through separations and retirements. Countering these losses, we have on average hired about 1,740 veterans per month during this fiscal year. In 2011, in support of Executive Order 13518, Employment of Veterans in the Federal Government, VA established the Veteran Employment Services Office, VESO, within the Office of Human Resources and Administration. VESO supports the Interagency Council on Veterans Employment, created by the Executive Order, by recruiting qualified veteran candidates for critical VA positions, managing retention initiatives, and reporting the veteran hiring and retention statistics for VA to the Council for inclusion in its annual report to the President. VESO focuses on giving veterans the tools to find federal jobs, making the transition to civilian employment seamless, and improving veteran engagement and satisfaction. Activities include personalized one-on-one services to support federal veteran recruitment, support to retention efforts, support to veterans throughout a deployment life cycle, and providing federal partners with services that support veterans recruitment. In closing, every day at VA, we see the sacrifices which veterans have made for our nation. It is our responsibility and privilege to support their return to civilian employment. We're committed to continue our robust and successful focus on veterans hiring in VA. Chairman Wenstrup, thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I'm prepared to respond to any questions the subcommittee may have.
Well, thank you, Ms. Satara. Mr. Reinhold, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Wenstrup, Ranking Member Takano, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for your invitation to testify at today's hearing on veterans' employment in the federal government and OPM's role in the implementation of veterans' preference in the federal hiring process. This administration has made it a priority to honor veterans for their service and sacrifice in defense of our nation, including assisting them in re-entering civilian life and finding employment. In November of 2009, President Obama issued an executive order laying out 3 objectives: that we honor our obligations to our nation's veterans, that we use the talents of veterans to help the federal government meet today's dynamic challenges, and that we create a model veterans employment program. Veterans bring distinctive training, skills, leadership, and experiences that we need at every agency in the federal government. The federal government invests significant resources in the training and development of the brave men and women in our military. Efforts to hire transitioning military service personnel to positions in the federal workforce helps maximize our return on this investment. Veterans possess a wide variety of skills and experiences, as well as a dedication to public service that can be of enormous benefit to the government as an employer and to the American people that these individuals will continue to serve. Not only is hiring veterans the right thing to do, it also makes good business sense. Preference eligibility for veterans in federal employment is defined in statute and applies to new appointments in both the competitive and accepted service. The technical application of veterans preference is defined in statute and regulation and varies depending on the ranking and selection method used by the employing agency to select candidates for federal employment. Additionally, OPM encourages agencies to make full use of the various hiring authorities that can facilitate veterans' employment. This includes veterans recruitment appointments, which are an accepted authority that allows agencies to appoint an eligible veteran without competition. Agencies may also non-competitively appoint any veteran with a 30% or more service-connected disability. And though not specifically for veterans, the Schedule A authority for people with disabilities is an accepted authority that agencies can use to appoint eligible veterans who have a severe physical, psychological, or intellectual disability. Finally, the Veterans Employment Opportunities Act allows veterans to apply to job announcements that are otherwise open only to current or former federal employees who completed requirements for career or career conditional tenure. These efforts have yielded good results since 2009. In FY 2014, 33.2% of executive branch new hires were veterans, surpassing the FY 2000 rate of 31%. Veterans currently represent 30.8% of the federal workforce, as compared to 25.8% in FY 2009. The federal government has protections in place in order to ensure veterans are properly accorded the preference to which they are entitled. OPM, through our Merit System Accountability and Compliance Office, conducts regular reviews of agency delegated examining units across the government to ensure that veterans are receiving the preference they've earned in the federal hiring process. Executive branch recourse exists for a veteran or other preference eligible who believes that his or her rights under any law or regulation related to veterans' preference have been violated, a disabled veteran who believes he or she has been discriminated against in employment because of his or her disability, and the intentional failure by a government official to comply with veterans' preference requirements. Public outreach is key to the government's recruiting efforts. We teamed with our administration partners to create fedshirevets.gov to serve as the principal source for federal employment information to assist our veterans, transition service members, their families, federal HR professionals, and hiring managers. The purpose of the site is to provide consistent and accurate federal employment information, useful training, and other resources to better inform the applicant, the employee, and the hiring agency. Agencies are responsible for applying the law correctly so that preferences are not inappropriately withheld or granted. To support agencies in this effort, OPM recently launched the Hiring Excellence Campaign. Through this campaign, OPM is working directly with agency hiring managers and human resources staff to help them identify skills gaps and find and recruit the best talent to fill positions. This allows us to hear directly from hiring managers and supervisors, while also giving us the opportunity to have discussions with federal agencies about the tools and flexibilities available to them, including those available for hiring veterans. We've also launched a hiring toolkit on HR University, which provides guidance on various hiring authorities and flexibilities, information about assessment techniques, and how to leverage data to inform recruiting and outreach. Since 2009, significant progress has been made to enhance employment opportunities for veterans in the federal government, but we know that challenges remain and improvements can be made. As OPM works to meet our mission to recruit, retain, and honor a world-class workforce, we'll continue to focus on helping agencies bring in skilled and diverse employees with the best talent to serve the American people. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing, and I welcome any questions.
I thank you all for your remarks, and I'll now yield myself 5 minutes for questions. I'm not sure who can answer this best of the three of you, but I'm just curious, what % of veterans that are applying for jobs that are not hired end up filing a complaint? Or even an estimate? Or
I can ask, I can follow up for the record, more information. When you look at for fiscal year 2015, there were, all of the 590 cases that were closed, 371 had no merit. The issues were, in that particular case, was 359 were hiring issues. I'm not sure exactly further details how that is. But we can get back to you, see if staff has a further breakdown. If you look at the cases in 2015, only 5.4%, as I mentioned, had merit. In the previous year, only 2.3% had merit. So there's a huge percentage that have no merit.
So you see where I'm going with this. I'm just wondering if it's like an automatic process for people that if they're not hired, they just immediately, make a claim. So that's an interesting statistic, too, that out of all of those, only 5.4% had merit. And from what I understand, and I think you touched on this, someone knowingly disregarded the system as it should take place. And so how do you prove that someone knowingly was adverse to the veteran?
Once the case is closed as far as Department of Labor, then it would be referred to the Merit System Protection Board. All of those cases, for instance, I can just talk about the Department of Labor. If you look at the number of cases that was filed with us, there were 6 cases in fiscal year 2015. Out of the 6, 1 case that was found to have merit. When I looked at the previous years with the low amount of merit, that leads me to believe that the system is complex, it's very difficult to understand, whether it's on the hiring manager side or the veteran themselves as far as how does the law apply to them. I've read a couple of reports from the Merit System Protection Board, and they actually recommend that the statutes and regulations governing veterans' preference should be consolidated and streamlined in one single body. Both reports in August and November recommended that recommendation.
Well, I guess I'm still curious as to how you discover that somebody knowingly acted out of bounds of the rules and against the veteran. What is it that actually proves that? And maybe that's kind of something that needs to be better defined to show how they did that. And then in the case of someone who knowingly did that, what action was taken on the manager that knowingly disregarded the system or knowingly ruled against the veteran when they should not have?
Only in cases where merit was referred to the OCS for violations. In those cases, if they're not resolved, the claimant, if they're not satisfied, then they can file with the the Merit System Board. But I'm not sure all of those cases how many are actual intentional. But we can get back to for the record.
Yeah, I'd just like
on
looking at
so.
further, more on process, I guess, as much as anything else. And another question I have is, during the process, are there any points awarded for anyone else besides veterans, for something in their background or their status or organization or affiliation with something? Or are there only additional points awarded to veterans through the hiring process? Are there other point systems?
So I'm happy to take that one. Generally speaking, when agencies apply an assessment to a pool of candidates, they often use a numerical score to rate and rank those candidates. Veterans' preference is the only provision in statute that provides a benefit to individuals of additional points. So for many veterans, it's 5 points, and for disabled veterans with a 30% or more service-connected disability, it is 10 points.
Okay, so those points are in at the beginning. I just real quickly, and maybe we can take this for the record, Mr. Secretary, is there any type of training or recommendations you may have that we can do things during the TAP program to enhance veterans' preparation for applying with the VA?
Thank you very much. Under the new curriculum, it actually talks about veterans' preference, and what we've done for that new curriculum is actually we took the OPM's site as far as it relates to veterans' preference under that curriculum. Plus, OPM actually teaches the trainers, I believe they have an hour worth of training as far as it relates to the veterans' preference piece under the TAP program. But we, and the curriculum was signed off on OPM. by OPM as
Answered
far as
my
what's in
question.
it.
Thank you, sir.
And sir, if I could just ask, I was integrally involved during the redesign of the Transition Assistance Program, the TAP program, and that was also in responsiveness to the VOW Act, the career readiness standards, and a checklist to help the veteran be career ready, the transitioning service member, to be career ready and to be an advocate, to have knowledge of what hiring authorities that they're eligible for, so that gives them an extra punch toward their career readiness as they transition.
Well, thank you. I now recognize the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, do you have, I want to ask you about retention of veterans once they are hired. So it's just once they, we've talked about the process and about getting the veterans preference and recourses for veterans that feel that they might not have been treated fairly. But I want to talk about what happens in the agencies, or what are agencies doing to retain them, and what do those statistics look like?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranking Member. I can provide you for fiscal year 2013 in the committee. In 2014, the retention rate for veterans versus non-veterans in all the agencies, I'll make sure we provide that to you for the committee's reference. Looking quickly at the list, the agency that the lowest retention rate is 61.54% for veterans, and the highest agency that has 88.41% retention rate. So it does vary depending on the agencies, but we'll provide the committee with this recommendation. There's actually a Council on Veterans Employment meeting on May 4th. I had a subcommittee meeting last week, and part of that discussion is to find out what agencies are doing as far as retention, trying to get the best practices for each agency, and so we can get that out to all the agencies as far as the retention rate.
Okay. Do these retention rate statistics also indicate whether or not they may be intentionally letting these veterans go before the end of their probationary period? I know that there were these, when I was on the community college board, there was always this part of the year where new faculty, for example, were going to run up against that moment by which it would become very, very difficult under their tenure to have them removed. And then, and so often, is there a similar sort of probationary period letter that, there has to be some statistic on this as well?
As far as why they might leave, it could be for various reasons. They actually could receive a promotion somewhere else that actually will better the veteran, or they could leave for another agency. So we do not delve into the reasons why they left, but I do have the number as far as the retention. They could have left for various reasons. I have heard the comment, the anecdotal comment that you just mentioned, that they just keep them there until they can say, well, we hired a veteran, and then they let them go. But that would be a concern, but that's only anecdotal at this time, and we'll be definitely keeping a very close eye on that as well.
Do we have numbers on that? Do we know? I mean, we should be able to know people hired under the preference. If we should know how many of them are leaving before.
Oh yes, we have numbers on the retention rate and how many are leaving as well, not only on the veterans population, but also in the non-veteran population. So we do have those numbers by agencies, and we'll provide the committee with that list.
Okay.
And the 2015 numbers hopefully will be out soon, so you'll be able to have 13, 14, and 15.
Well, I certainly would appreciate your office's cooperation in helping us understand what's going on and ascertain whether there are any patterns. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Costello, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to ask about the following. In talking about the training provided to service members during TAP about veterans' preference laws, do you feel that there needs to be any more of an emphasis or further emphasis on the benefits that veterans' preference laws provide to service members, specifically so that they understand what preferences they may be entitled to during the federal hiring process? I'll ask a second question so that you can just sort of take them both at the same time. Do you have any recommendations to improve existing veterans' preference laws, and if so, what might they be?
Thank you very much. Yeah, the veterans' preference is taught in the TAP class. The facilitators are trained on the veterans' preference piece. That portion of the TAP class, if you look at the book, curriculum, is actually what was signed off by OPM, since OPM administers the Veterans Preference Law and regulations. As far as what we need to improve, if you look at the role that the Department of Labor plays, is we deal with the complaints. If someone feels that they've been violated as far as veterans' preference. And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that only 5.4% in fiscal year 2015 and only 2.3% in fiscal year 2014 were found to have merit, that leads me to believe, consistent with the Merit System Protection Board, that the statutes and regulation governing veterans' preference should be consolidated, streamlined, so it'll be easier to administer it and easier to understand the process. So we do have, Department of Labor, we do keep track of the cases that we currently have, but once they leave us, getting back to the chairman question, as far as what happens after that, once they leave us, it goes to the Merit System Protection Board, and then they deal with that. So they would have hopefully a more comprehensive reason why they rule in a certain way, but that's something that I can't answer because that's outside of the Department of Labor.
As a follow-up, you mentioned the word feedback. Amongst VA employees who have taken the mandatory training for HR professionals and hiring managers on veterans preference, what type of feedback have you received from employees about that training, if any? I would have to let VA talk about the VA piece, but what we do at the Department of Labor, we actually have a military Veterans Alliance, a Veterans Affinity group that meets regularly and gives input to the senior leadership at the Department of Labor on how we better can recruit, retain employees, at the Department of Labor. That's why I'm very pleased when you look at the overall department, particularly vets. 80% of our employees are veterans for the department. As far as the VA, what they do, I'd leave that for the VA to be able to. Ms. Otero?
Good afternoon, sir. As far as the training for veterans preference and for HR specialists and hiring managers, OPM developed a curriculum, and it's available on HR University, and we find that it's a very robust training. And we also have our VESO office, our Veterans Employment Service office, that is able to help our hiring managers if they want to navigate. Some of them want to hire and they want to look for a 30% disabled veteran. So we're finding our hiring managers are advocating and they want to hire a veteran, and that we feel that the robustness of the training is there, that there is strength in the availability through our learning management system, through HR University, and that we do have the added support to provide technical assistance. Any of our HR specialists are able to help hiring managers navigate.
And do you have, within the VA, any program or pipeline in order to recruit and retain veterans at a higher rate? Within the VA, I mean, could you describe that a little bit?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean about recruit and retain at a higher rate.
Veterans employees that you have within the VA, can you describe what the VA does to recruit and retain
employees at the VA who are
Okay.
veterans? I
Yes,
apologize.
we recognize that some of our veterans and transitioning service members have some challenges with that cultural adaptation from leaving military service to coming to sometimes a desk job. So we offer coaching and very strong, robust mentoring programs, and that we try to get them to feel that connection to a job. And a lot of times it is through mentoring and having another VA employee who is also a veteran help guide them toward that career preparedness to be ready for a promotion when it becomes available, to get the training needed to build their technical skills.
Thank you.
Ms. Rice, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak with Secretary Michaud. First, I want to welcome you here and thank you for your commitment to veterans. And you actually showed that by traveling all the way out to my district to visit the American Job Center in Hempstead in February, and everyone was very grateful for your visit. But one of the things that we constantly hear, whether it's in that kind of a forum where we were or in hearings like this, is outreach, and how is it that we connect service members to this benefit that they may not be aware of. So what is the outreach plan, and is there any way to quantify how many veterans are not aware of this and how we can better reach out to them?
As far as outreach, this is taught at the TAP class when every soldier gets ready to leave the military. There is a portion of that that talks about veterans preference that is consistent with what OPM has approved. One of the areas as far as outreach, we're trying to make it easier as for soldiers or men and women who are in the TAP class, but once they leave to have a refresher course. The Department of Labor TAP curriculum is going to be on ebook ready, and it's going to be on Kindle, so it'll be available 24/7. So if someone needs a refresher course, particularly as it relates to veterans preference, then they'd be able to take that refresher course. When we do outreach, when we talk about encouraging businesses to hire business, that's where a lot of our outreach has been in the private sector, collaborating with the Chamber of Commerce and the business community, talking about the benefits of hiring a veteran and why they should hire a veteran and actually help them find veterans. That has been our primary focus on outreach. As far as veterans' preferences, each agency has a goal that OPM has given guidance on that goal, and I'll let OPM talk about that. But we in the Department of Labor, with the affinity group, really are focused on how can we better recruit, how can we retain the veterans that are in the department, and we've actually done a phenomenal job in the department, and will continue to encourage our HR folks to hire veterans. But as far as overall recruitment, that is more of a OPM question.
So if in your, I think one of the earlier questions asked you about how many, was it appeals that people who were not hired, veterans who were not hired, who would appeal. What are the, in your study of this, what are the most common causes of a federal agency's failure to comply with the veterans' preference provision in hiring? I mean, you said that you found that some were not for cause, but what were the reasons? Was it a lack of training? Was it intentional? What was the preference for someone else? I mean, what was the reason?
I'll have to refer to staff if they know more in detail, but when you look at the broader issues, for instance, in 2015, the number of cases that were found to have no merit, out of the 371, 359 were because of hiring. As far as what is in that hiring, I'd have to get back to you for the record.
Well, but don't you think that, I mean, to me, that's very relevant information, because if you're talking about training veterans and training employers, and there are the hiring is not, I mean, I just think that the reason for why a veteran is not hired in this preference program would be relevant.
Yeah. When you look at, absolutely, and when you look at that only 5.4% have merit, part of the bulk of the reasoning is actually the lack or understanding of the law. And, it's a very complex law. It's a law where it's spread out through all of Title V, and that complexity is the reason why a lot of these cases are found to not have merit. As far as the ones that do have merit and they move forward, I'm not sure exactly the final outcome of those, but for the investigations that we do, they have no merit, and that's primarily because of the complexity of the law that's out there, and has been consistent with what the Merit System Protection Board has stated in their last report.
The complexity of the law on the part of the employer understanding it?
As part of the veteran and/or employer. Some veterans think that because of the veteran's preference that they will automatically be hired in the federal services. That is not the case. When you look at veterans' preference, you can have two very well-qualified candidates, and if one is a veteran, one is not, then the veteran should get hired. But you could have several candidates that are very well-qualified, and they very well all could be veterans, and one gets hired, but 4 or 5 others do not get hired. You could have cases for those other veterans.
Wait, no, I mean, I don't know how many of those are
Yeah.
top 3 choices that they can choose from are all veterans, or if it's a civilian and a veteran. And I think that if more of these appeals are found to be, a smaller percentage of them have merit, then we have to figure out what the issue is with the majority of those cases not having merit.
Yeah, the issue with the investigations that we do at the Department of Labor is because of the complexity of the law and the lack of understanding of the law. Just because a case is filed doesn't mean that the HR manager violated the law. It could be that the veteran was not eligible in the first place. So that complexity of the law and complication is what I believe is driving the huge amount of non-meritorious cases that are found.
Understood. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Zeldin, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Rice, do you need any additional time? Ms. Rice, would you like me to yield to you any additional time? I don't mind. I wouldn't mind yielding 1.5 minutes to Ms. Rice.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Zeldin. I wanted to just, Mr. Michaud, I don't know if you were wanted some of the heat to be off you. Not that I was putting any heat on you, but you were talking about the agency goals for hiring. If you could just talk about that very briefly, Mr. Reinhold, from OPM's position. Can you just explain that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. It is actually a performance model that was created by the Veterans Employment Council in collaboration with OPM and other agencies. And it is designed to provide a benchmark, if you will, so that agencies have something to compare themselves to see how they're doing when it comes to hiring veterans and retaining veterans. It is a performance model that is comprised of 4 components, which include percentage of your new hires who are veterans, percentage of new hires who are disabled veterans, your total veterans as a percentage of your total workforce, and retention. And all of those factors are combined. Agencies are compared to similar-sized agencies, so they're compared to a cohort group. And all of those, there is an algorithm, if you will, that essentially comes up with a rating for an agency ranging from exemplary down to needs improvement. It is not there are not targets, but rather it is really meant to be informative and instructive to agencies so that they can see how they're doing and they can identify areas where they need to improve.
So what agency, in your understanding, or that you're aware of, has the worst performance?
I don't have that information, but the To my knowledge, the ratings of exemplary through needs improvement are documented, and that is something we'd be happy to follow up on.
That would be great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Zeland.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Otero, are you familiar with the statement made by Dr. Gonzalo Solis Sanchez of the VA's Caribbean healthcare system that was quite controversial?
I did become aware of it 2 days ago.
Okay, and have you had an opportunity to look into it at all internally?
I must confess, I just heard about the matter. I do understand that the article seemed to extrapolate some comments, and I haven't seen any official transcript of any deposition, but I just want to state emphatically that Veterans Affairs does not tolerate any bias, and there is no room for that type of behavior. And I have inquired with the Veterans Health Administration, and the doctor has been retrained, and my understanding is that some of his statements were taken out of context because he was discussing a Title 38, a pure Title 38 position that was a medical position, and where veterans' preference is only considered if there are absolute, equally competent applicants, and that the veteran's preference would then be applied as a positive factor. But yes, sir, I want to emphasize that there is no tolerance for bias or that type of statement.
Well, okay, so just two things then on that. One, with regards to the words being taken out of context, what was reported was a transcript from a July 2014 deposition in an EEOC complaint where in the exchange with the doctor, when asked whether or not the VA provides a hiring preference, his response was not really and thank God. But it's this exchange is documented, so no one's taking anything out of context. It's actually word for word. So what is the retraining that would take place in a case like this?
As a senior executive, all senior executives, when you're onboarded, you're given an onboarding training, and you're told about ethics, about HR hiring, about policies, and so it was reiterated to the doctor what the veteran's preference rules are, what the authorities are, and explaining that that is our commitment to.
Do you know when that retraining took place?
I don't know exactly, because I just found out about the article 2 days ago, and I inquired, and I just found out this morning that there was retraining. I don't know the date, but I will take it for the record.
Okay, and would you be able to submit that to the committee as to when the retraining took place?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and is anything usually put in writing as far as this retraining or counseling?
I couldn't speak to that, because if it's about any counseling or any discussion with that person's supervisor, I would not have knowledge of it, and I don't have.
Okay, so you can submit to the committee when the retraining took place.
Yes.
If you find out if anything was done in writing, would you be able to let us know that as well?
Yes, sir, I'll take
Thank
that
you.
for the record.
I yield back.
I now invite our second and final panel to the table. With us today, we have Mr. Alex Morosky, the Deputy Director of the National Legislative Service for the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States, Mr. Daniel P. Smith, the Assistant Director of the Veterans Employment and Education Division for the American Legion, and Mr. Rick Weidman, the Executive Director of Government Affairs for the Vietnam Veterans of America. I want to thank you all for being here today, for your service to our nation in uniform, and for your hard work and advocacy on behalf of our nation's veterans. In the effort of time, we are going to submit all of your testimonies for the record so that we can go directly to questions to you, and I appreciate your willingness on that part. And with that, I will allow myself 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Weidman, can you explain why removing the quote-unquote knowingly portion in VEOA is so important?
Mr. Chairman, the Veterans Employment Opportunities Act actually started in this room, even though it was considered by another committee. And it was action of Mike Brink, when he and I both had hair in 1996, who brought in Mr. Micah's, John Micah's staff, who was head of that Civil Service Subcommittee at that time. And Mr. Micah was our great champion throughout the 2 Congresses that we had to go through to get here. When it left Mr. Micah's subcommittee and left the full committee on the workforce to go to the other side of the hill, the word knowingly was not in there. And it got inserted on the Senate side specifically as a poison pill, and it's worked because virtually no managers have ever been disciplined, much less fired, for violating veterans' preference, no matter how egregious the violation is. And it's OPM, not specifically the individuals who are here, but OPM in general and HR shops across the government have tried to confuse veterans' preference with affirmative action. 2 totally different animals. Veterans' preference is based on a 19th century concept of the bounty, which is reward for sacrifices made and service rendered. And that's the basis of it. That's why California, when their state Supreme Court threw out affirmative action, upheld veterans' preference, because it was a different philosophical base. Incidentally, the other thing that's different about veterans is we're black, we're brown, we're white, we're Native American, we're Asian and Pacific Islanders, men, women, and increasingly women. So you can satisfy every affirmative action guideline in the book and only hire vets, and in many cases only hire disabled vets. So, but you're not going to get any enforcement of that across the government until you take that word knowingly out. If somebody's a manager and doesn't understand veterans' preference, then they ought to be immediately relieved and proceedings started to dismiss them for total incompetence.
I appreciate that, and on the other point, I feel that being a veteran is a qualification in and of itself that lends you to greater expertise in working in the VA. That's maybe just my personal opinion, but I find it to be true. Mr. Morosky, in your written statement, you commented that veterans' preference laws currently disadvantage reservists and guardsmen that have not served 180 consecutive days on active duty. This subcommittee has been working with the Health Subcommittee to fix this and change it to 180 cumulative days of active duty service to be eligible for veterans' preference. Could you inform us why you believe this change is necessary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Particularly in the post 9/11 era, and for Guard and reservists in particular, they get activated for short periods of time, but several times throughout their careers. And so in many cases, although they're not necessarily able to accumulate 180 days consecutively, put together they'll have far more than 180 days, and we feel as though that service should also be recognized for the purposes of veterans' preference. We just new topic that we hadn't been aware of has just come to our attention where you have veterans in some cases who are going to school full-time, student veterans, who are being activated just to go fly drones on the weekends. That's good service. I mean, that should count towards veterans' preference, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Takano, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Weidman, you state in your written testimony, the Disabled Veteran Affirmative Action Program, or DVAAP, should be scrapped. The DVAAP plans for federal entities are never effectively checked for the actual result against the stated goals at the end of each year. This thing serves no purpose except to be a fig leaf for agencies doing nothing or little to hire disabled veterans and other veterans preference eligible. Furthermore, veterans are not another affirmative action group, as you said in your oral testimony. My question to you is, why do you recommend scrapping the program rather than straighten it out? Don't these vets need this initiative to get jobs?
Implicit in that, Congressman, is that veterans are, in fact, an affirmative action group. and that if you get 30% of the new hires are veterans, then that's okay. You've met that quota. But that's not it. Veterans preference accrues as an individual right to the man or woman who takes the step forward, pledging life and limb to defend the Constitution, particularly during wartime, and that's when they get veterans preference. So shouldn't be included in affirmative action, and that's where it was stuck for years, and it's still stuck there. It should be with the deputy of the agency. The chief operating officer ought to be responsible to make sure that the agency is looking first to qualified veterans and disabled veterans, sir.
So your quarrel is that it's classified as an affirmative action program.
It is that, and nobody checks. OMB has for years put the same, they changed the number by one or something, and they have never come close to actually meeting it, but they submit the same plan on their website every year. Nobody comes back and says, wait a minute, you didn't do anything towards recruiting disabled vets.
All right, thank you. Is voice been called, or?
They
have. What are your members' main complaints with the veterans preference process, real quickly?
The main complaint that we hear is people apply for a job, they don't get the job, and they feel that a non-veteran was necessarily hired ahead of them, or they don't understand that you have to also be qualified and meet the basic job qualifications in the first place. There's sort of a myth that a veteran's preference is a guarantee of employment in any job in the federal government that you apply for, and so I think that could be helped with training. Better training at the TAP program. The TAP website could probably be a little bit better instead of being essentially just a narrative of the highly technical statutory language, maybe do a myth-fact, frequently asked questions, that sort of thing. But that's the main complaint we get, is that people are upset because they didn't get hired, but they don't necessarily understand the system either.
Okay, I think that kind of answers my other question. Quickly, anything to add from either one of you?
Yes, thank you for the question. The main thing is it's subjective. There's no way to know if veterans' preference is actually being followed. You have an HR manager or a hiring official inside of a closed door. They have two applicants, one's a civilian, one's a veteran. There's no way of knowing if they're using veteran preference. I don't have a solution for that, and American Legion doesn't have a solution for that. Hopefully this committee could look into that. But ultimately, there is no way of knowing. When veterans' preference is used, it works. I'll leave it at that.
All right, Mr. Weidman, anything to add?
The proof is in the pudding, Congressman. And look, what underpins all of this? Unfortunately, racism and sexism are alive and not well within our society. But so is vetism. And it's every bit as ugly as racism or sexism. And people don't like us. And it all started during Vietnam. And it became part of the corporate culture of the federal bureaucracy. And it's passed on. And they do things, they're still doing things like quote-unquote outstanding scholar program in order to get around veterans' preference. When I was in school a million years ago, when I rode my horse up to Colgate University, the 3.5 meant you were way up there. The median grade point average of my class was 2.7, and that was reflective of colleges around the country. And what happened in the late 60s and 70s was great inflation. 3.5 now is no big deal at a lot of institutions. And so it's a way to circle around veterans' preference. Like I say, you can satisfy every affirmative action guideline in the world and hire only vets.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Costello, do you have any questions at this time?
I do, but Mr. Smith, if you could detail for the record, and I think we don't want to miss votes, if you could detail your suggestion as to how you would streamline the veterans' preference rights, any violation or allegation of violation, as well as why you feel that it may be necessary to streamline. I think that's an important question that I'd like to get feedback on. I'll yield back.
Ms. Rice, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, It's bothersome to me that a lot of the veterans apply for positions because most of them are offered by either the VA, DOD, or Homeland Security. And the fact that they're not getting jobs there because of a lack of qualification or misunderstanding of the law is bothersome enough. But I'd like to just put it out to everyone for us to figure out a way to encourage other agencies within the federal government to be as aggressive as the VA, DOD, and Homeland Security are, and actually pass that on to our veterans to understand that they don't have to just these three agencies to choose from. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One of the things I'm taking away from this is that we don't really have a definitive system that we're working with on this. That we don't have a defined set of rules that we can follow. I agree with you, Mr. Weidman, on the knowingly portion. It certainly changes things. One of the things I was trying to get to is what are the criteria and how do you prove knowingly? And so we should have a system in place, and that's something that we need to work on. So I want to thank you all for being here today and for taking the time to discuss these issues and for your testimony. It's valuable to us. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous material. Without objection, so ordered, and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.